Morning, everyone. Pleasure and a privilege, as always, to be here to share what I've learned on the topics that have been assigned to me. And we're kicking off a new series today, The Christian and Money. And it starts with this lesson, Materialism and Its Dangers, or the Dangers of Materialism. So I just wanted to share something I saw yesterday, which a few people sent to me. And it's a clip from a photographer called Humans of New York. I'm sure many of you know this account on Instagram. It's by Brandon Stanton, and he takes photographs and videos. So I just want to share this. I thought it was very funny. Hold on.
Pet or something. Adults just really like money. It's like their pet or something. They just be like, oh, you have more money than me. Oh, no, you have more money than me. And they just start fighting. Because money is green. And you get to buy stuff. And adults like a lot of stuff. Whack shoes, whack ties, and everybody likes money. When it comes to money, you get fights. And when it comes to fights, you get hospitals. When it comes to hospitals, you get money. Adults should.
So I thought this kid was very perceptive, young kid. I thought I would share that his observations about money, despite probably not having ever made money or used a lot of money himself. Okay, hold on. So someone has said a joke that money is the opposite of weather, because everyone talks about the weather, but no one does anything about it. No one talks about money, but everyone does something about it, which is true in some senses. Obviously, not everyone is quiet about money. Some people talk about money all the time, and some people don't talk about the weather. But it's funny because it is definitely true for some people. It's easy to talk about the weather. It's not so easy to talk about money because it can be a sensitive topic. But when I thought about this joke, it sort of revealed that, well, first of all, we all do something about money because we need money. It's a reality that we live in a material world. We have a material body, a physical body, that needs sustenance. It needs food, it needs clothing, it needs shelter. And money is a means to get those things. We also need it for security and growth. Needs that go beyond just the basic food, shelter, and clothing. So, for example, you need savings in case there are rainy days ahead, or health problems that you might need money to solve. You need to save. Right? You need education to prepare yourself for the working life, and in most countries, or in many situations, education does cost a bit. And you might need to invest because you might want to grow a business, or you might want to use money to gain something, right? And you need some sort of capital to start with. So it's actually undeniably important. Nobody can say that money is not important. You might not like to say it, but it's actually true. Money is important. But the question isn't whether money is important. I think it would be very naive of us, for me, to stand here and say, oh, actually, money is not important. It's the question of how important it is and where it sits in our list of priorities, and how we have values surrounding that money. And I think that's the point of the series, to examine those values. I don't think the point of the series is to tell you at the end of the day, actually, money is not important. You can just ignore money and act as if money is not important, right? Because then you would all be just, not be responsible with money, or not be hardworking with money, and be bums, or just live off welfare. And I don't think that's the vision that God has for Christians. Right? God praises, even in the Old Testament and the New, the value of diligence, the value of working hard. So that's not the point of the series, and that's not the point of this lesson. The point of this lesson is to see, okay, if money is important, how important is it, and how do we view it? How do we treat it? What are our values that we hold in relation to money? How we attain it, how we use it, what are our perspectives on it? And that's what we're examining today, and in the rest of the series as Um, there is a very interesting passage or verse that I read when I was preparing this lesson. It's Proverbs chapter 13, verse 7. There are people who pretend to be rich yet have nothing. There are people who pretend to be poor yet have great wealth. And this was obviously written thousands of years ago. But it still holds true today. It's quite hard actually to judge someone's wealth unless you have access to a lot of their confidential and intimate information, right? Their bank accounts, what assets they have. It's generally quite hard to find out how rich someone really is because the lifestyle that they live may or may not indicate their actual wealth, right? So, for example, you might see people on social media who seem extremely wealthy, right? They are buying new watches and cars and houses every other day. But behind that facade is actually a lot of doctoring of that imagery because their own success or their own career, perhaps a career in sales, for example, relies on that kind of, I would say, almost like an illusion of wealth. But actually, they're not that wealthy. They're just borrowing a lot. They're just rolling a lot. They're just um, using props a lot. So it really can be quite difficult. And your parents would have often told you, like the richest man in their neighborhood was someone riding a bicycle in a white singlet going to the bank and banking in like 100,000, right? And it holds true because it's quite difficult to judge someone just on outward appearance. It can be quite difficult, and of course sometimes it isn't difficult, but sometimes it is. And generally, we cannot assume that just because you act rich, you are, or if you seem poor doesn't mean you are. And it's also impossible to really judge what their true views or values are for certain wealth. Someone can be very, very wealthy, but actually not that materialistic. And someone can be relatively poor or relatively less wealthy and still be extremely materialistic. And you know this from your interactions with friends, right? You know some people, may have very, I would say, modest jobs, but their lifestyle seems to be constantly like seeking the next the next boost of perhaps something that makes them seem wealthy, right? They're looking to buy the next car, the next luxury item, etc., etc. And they're not discreet about it, despite they're perhaps they seem to be constantly reaching beyond what they can afford, and for no particular practical reason other than validation or to show off. So again, it's very hard to tell on an individual level where their wealth is and how they view their wealth, how they view wealth in general. It's quite hard to tell on an individual basis, unless again you're very, very close to them and you know a lot of details about them, which the general public may not be intimate to. But societally, beyond the individual basis, as a society as a whole, it's quite clear that a lot of society worships wealth and the wealth. I think a lot of us, even Christians, might subconsciously, not intentionally, but subconsciously, attribute wealth to moral good and wisdom. So it's not something. What I'm saying is not something new because even in the past, right, Jesus was condemning how. The apostles were condemning how people give the best seat to the rich. Why? I mean, it's not as if the rich are more moral or more pious or more righteous, in the eyes of God, but the church was still giving precedence and privilege to the rich for no other reason. And today it's the same. When I say we mean as a society, not as a church, we adore the rich. We don't say it out loud, but we do because we listen to what they say when they speak in magazines and in newspapers. We don't really blink an eye when we say, "Oh yeah, he should be a leader because he's a very good businessman, right? He's made so much wealth. Yeah, he should be a good politician or he should be a good member of government." don't have any qualms to say, yeah, of course they should. And we give them positions of privilege and power that we don't really question. A lot of people don't question. Because I think, again, subconsciously, we view that if they're rich, there must be some moral reason why they're rich. God blesses them, they're smart, they're wise, they're more in tune with the world, etc. But of course, when you examine deeper into those assumptions, they may or may not hold, well, they probably don't hold true at all, actually, but they are quite widely believed or widely held. Right? So if you put like someone who has a very modest career, for example, actually he'll make a great leader, or he'll make a great governor. He'll be a great leader of a department in government. People will be like, no, are you sure? Right? But they might question that. They may be very, very skeptical. But if you put someone who's rich and successful, they're like, yeah, sure, it makes sense. Without really examining, but why? Why is it in the former situation you have so much skepticism, but in the latter you don't? Because of these underlying subconscious views that we have about the world, that we have about wealth. We know the famous passage in Matthew 6, verse 24, that we cannot serve God and mammon. And mammon is materialism or material things. You cannot serve both because you either love one and hate the other, hate one and love the other. That's Jesus' earliest messages to his disciples that he comes to serve both. And 2,000 years later, we are still grappling with this challenge. We are still grappling with this challenge of wanting to serve both. I don't think anyone in this auditorium will say, no, I love money. I want to serve money. I want to abandon God. No one will say that, right? But when we look at our lives, perhaps we are sort of stuck in between the two. We are trying to figure out how can I really serve both. And this is not an incrimination of all of you. It is just a reflection of myself as well, and the challenge I have with regards to career and money. Right? That yeah, sure, we want to serve God. We also don't want to let go serving, striving for success. Does the Bible have a lot to say about money? Well, the Bible has a lot to say actually about money, a lot more than I thought actually. The Bible has verses on contentment, on the love of money, and worldliness. So, for example, covetousness is a topic that's covered a lot in the Old Testament. Exodus chapter 20, verse 17. Obviously, I'm not going to give you all the verses, right? But I'm just going to give you some categories of what the Bible has spoken on vis-a-vis work and money. And these are very broad categories. Right? They're not necessarily specific to money in the sense that we understand of dollars and cents, but also wealth and handling of money and paying of debt. So work, labor, and rest, that's linked to money because nobody works for free. I don't know about you, but I don't work for free, right? Labor, rest, earning, ethics in business. The Bible talks about all these topics. An example is Proverbs chapter 10, verse 4. He becomes poor who works with a lazy hand, but the hand of decision brings wealth. Giving, tithing, and providing for others in generosity. Of course, in the Old Testament, there was a need to tithe. That was part of the Mosaical law, that you give 10% or a tenth of whatever you reap to the priesthood. Right? So that's Leviticus chapter 9, verse 19 to 10 as an example of not of tithing, but of keeping something for the poor. It was a form of giving because farmers were asked to keep the corners of their fields unharvested so that if the poor or the foreigner who needed food, they could go to the corners of the field and get the food that was there. Right? And so that was the commandment. So that's also linked to giving, for example. The Bible talks about prosperity and the blessings of actual prosperity, not just spiritual blessings, but also material blessings. First Chronicles chapter 23, verse 13. Then you will prosper if you observe to do your statutes and the ordinances which Yahweh gave Moses concerning Israel. The Bible talks about debt, clothing, interest, guarantors. For example, Psalms 37, 21. The wicked borrow and don't pay back, but the righteous give generously. It talks about prudence, how to deal with money, wisdom regarding material things. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 4. An example, he becomes poor who works with a lazy, but the hand of diligence. Sorry, that's a similar reference to the previous one. Actually, I wanted to put a different reference. It's okay. Trust me, there are verses about these topics. It even talks about bribes, taxes, and losses. Psalm 26, verse 9 to 10. Don't gather my soul with sinners, nor my life with bloodthirsty men, in whose hand is wickedness, their right hand is full of bribes. So it talks about how bribes are evil. So, can anyone guess how many verses there are in the Bible that fall within this category? I mean, they're relatively broad categories. Like I said, they're not just specific verses that talk about dollars and cents, but all these things. Can anyone guess how many verses are we looking at? Just throw out a figure. Don't worry, it's not. I'm not going to punish you. 500. Okay. Anyone else? Good guess. Sorry. 700. Oh, 7 verses. No, not 7 category, but how many actual verses? Like these are just categories, right? But if they're verses, at least 7. That's good. Good deduction. Anyone else? 600. Okay. Anyone? Last guess. Okay. So the person who did this exercise is actually a financial planner, and he counted that there were 1,196 verses that fall into this category. You can actually go and look at every verse in this link, and that's a lot. And he was actually relatively conservative with how he categorized this. There are people who have counted 2,000 verses, and they are more liberal about how they categorize whether this verse falls into something that talks about material things and money and wealth, or it doesn't. So his categories are the 7 that you see here, that are a little bit more focused and more direct. There are about 1,000. Some people say there are about 2,000 if you use a broader net. So let's start with the first verse, and we'll finish with 1119. Now, there are obviously too many to cover in one lesson and even in a series of lessons. But there are enough materials to give us an idea of what God views or wants us to view, how God wants us to view money, the underlying values within those verses. And that leads us specifically to where we are today when we're talking about materialism. So what is it? Materialism is an excessive desire for wealth and possession, often at the expense of spiritual values. That's one definition. Another definition is preoccupation with or emphasis on material objects, comforts and considerations, with a disinterest in or rejection of spiritual, intellectual, or cultural values. So a simple way to put it is money number one. Money comes first, and everything else is secondary or unimportant in relation to the first principle, which money is. In fact, there is. I remember my dad received from his remisier back when there was still remisiers this slip of paper, and it was folded in half, right? And you had to open it to see the rest of it. And the first one was, money is not the most important thing. And if you flip it open, it says money is the only thing. And it was a joke his remisier gave to him, but again, very telling of how the society views money. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1 to 5, but notice that in the last days, perilous times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying its power. So this list of terrible times, people living in terrible times and acting poorly, starts with loving yourself and then loving money. That's how the list starts, right? And if we are frank, then I think we can say that actually we are living in this age, right, of men who love themselves and who love money, and we have no qualms admiring such people. In fact, our society has no qualms admiring these people. And it's everywhere. Materialism is actually everywhere, and because it's everywhere, it's invisible. And what I mean by that is, for example, if you say where is oxygen, where is air, it's actually everywhere, but you don't think twice about it. It's like a fish who lives in the water. You won't know what water is because water is everywhere. And materialism is the same way. It is pervasive in modern society. unless you live in a small farm by yourself, you don't read the news, you don't watch TV, you don't interact with others, you're a little bit of a hermit, and maybe you can say, no, it's not everywhere. But for the rest of it, it is. You see in advertising, you see in social media how people portray their lives, how people influence others. It's in our consumerist society, right? Every 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 few months there's some new trends of how to spend your money, some new thing to buy. Every year there's some new designs, some update to your car, to your bag, to your phone, to your whatever. It never ends, right? And we don't really even think twice about it. It's become a norm that things are constantly requiring our attention and our wealth to be given to it. It's in even how we manage business, right? In many countries, perhaps not Malaysia, but in many countries, you have uncontrolled capitalism, or people who believe in uncontrolled capitalism, business without ethics, business without value. That as long as it meets the profit and the bottom line of profit and the bottom line of more money, then why not? You don't have to worry too much if it harms people, harms the environment. It creates a societal negative impact. So, for example, healthcare. If you leave healthcare entirely to the market, then you have a problem because the market will not be able to regulate in itself in a way that maximizes societal good. But healthcare is something that you need to balance on a societal level as well, because it doesn't just work on an individual level. Unlike luxury goods, for example, society doesn't need luxury goods. Some people might want luxury goods. Society doesn't, as a whole, doesn't need luxury goods, but society as a whole does need every member to be protected from the unpredictability of health. Society as a whole needs generally everyone to be healthier rather than unhealthier. Hustle culture of constantly striving, constantly working, I'm guilty of this, constantly promoting yourself, constantly having to market yourself, constantly having to find the next hustle of finding money. And when we ask people, hey, why are you working so hard? Or they ask themselves, why am I working so hard? The answer is always, I need more money, or I want more money. And it ends there, because no one will ask, well, not no one, but very few people will ask, but why? Why do you need more money? Or very few people will ask themselves, why do I need more money, actually? Because when you see someone who's hardworking, say, why are you working so hard? And the person says, I need more money lah. We just stop there. Because they're like, oh yeah, of course. It's very acceptable to say that, yeah, I need more money. I want more money. And we don't question, do you really need more money? Do you really have a need for it? We just end the conversation there because it's unexamined, this value that, yeah, okay, he wants to be richer. That's a good thing. Right? It even creeps into the church, the gospel, and this is a time cover from 2006, so it's a very, very long time ago. But the title says, does God want you to be rich? Yes, say some mega churches. Others call it heresy. The debate over the new gospel of wealth. So if you go on Amazon or Kinokuniya or whatever, and you can actually find titles like God wants you to be rich. There are actually such titles, right? And for some people, there's like, yeah, of course, God wants me to be rich. They may not actually question that. Wait, hold on, is that actually sound biblically? In churches, it's actually maybe subtler, but not absent. And I think it would be silly to think, or naive to think, that, oh, no. The church, or our church, could not possibly fall within that category of a materialistic church, or materialistic congregation, right? But we just need to turn to what Jesus did. Jesus in Matthew chapter 21, verse 12 to 13 was recorded as going to the temple and driving out all those who bought and sold in the temple and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. He said to them, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, and you have made it a den of thieves." Now, this was the temple of God in an extremely religious society. These were the first century Jews. They had the Jewish council, they had the Pharisees, the Sadducees, they had a whole host, they had rabbis, they had a whole host of a religious system in place. And the center of worship, the temple of God, was of course this sacred place. And yet, even in that situation, you have commercialism creeping in, and it angered people. You have to understand, these money changers and people who sell doves, right? They weren't selling for fun. They weren't like, oh, this is a convenient place to set up my business. They were actually helping those who came from foreign countries and wanted to make offerings, but they didn't have currency in the local currency to exchange. But they wanted to give peace offerings or other offerings, and they needed to buy doves and so on and so forth. So in a way, it was not purely like, oh, this is a good place to make money, but it was actually a place. It was actually in a way a means to help worshippers. But even then, Jesus said this is not right. You have made it a den of thieves. Such a strong condemnation, in fact, of the people who are doing this instead. Because he could see that this is the place of worship and holiness. We should have all these transactions should be done outside, not here on the temple grounds. And if it could happen then, I think it'd be naive to say, no. Our congregation or our churches or Christianity today cannot possibly have the same commercialism. It's very naive to say that. Because we today are also selling something in church. And I use selling with inverted commas. Not in the sense of buying and selling with currency, but we are offering something. We are offering, in a way, a package to those who walk in our doors and have know very little about Christianity or know nothing about Christianity. How are we packaging Christianity? Are we selling prosperity or the gospel? Are we selling our lifestyles of wealth and comfort, or are we selling spiritual blessings? When we say God will bless you, that's not wrong. We say if you're faithful, God will bless you, but we need to clarify with the listener. Wait, what kind of blessings are you talking about? Are you talking about spiritual blessings or material blessings? You may never have material blessings, and if you sell a gospel of if you are faithful, you will have blessings, implicit in that is material blessings, then you are selling a false gospel. You are selling a gospel which may never materialize for the believer, and is completely misplaced. But we don't really question that, right? We say, of course, we want to tell people that blessings are in God and you have blessings if you become Christian, which is absolutely true. But what I'm saying is that person needs to, both that person and us need to understand what blessings are we talking about. Right? God assures spiritual blessings, and in many cases, He also gives material blessings. At least material blessings to the extent of daily needs. That's coming. But beyond that, there's no promise. It may come, it may not come. Right? It may be God's will that you have a lot of material blessings. It may be God's will that you don't. But it is God's will that you have plenty of spiritual blessings. That I don't think we can deny. So we have to be careful when we say, materialism is a worldly problem. It is not a Christian problem. It is not a problem in this church. It's not a problem for me. Because it is. Because it's so invisible and pervasive that it actually can creep up into us on a subconscious level, on a basis that we don't examine, don't really realize. So we sometimes have the view that, if I'm faithful, God will give me more material blessings. Or sometimes we ask, why am I not as blessed as brothers or sisters? I'm equally faithful. Right? And underlying that assumption, blessed in a material sense, underlying that assumption is that if you are good to God, God will be good to you in the material sense. God will make you rich. Um, Sometimes people ask, or sometimes we even ask, why does this church look so old and small and dark? Because they are looking for an outward sign of, of success of a church in the material sense. Wow, it's so impressive. The sound system is $500,000. The building is a $3 million building or $4 million building. They're looking for that affirmation that this must be a good church because God has blessed its members with so much material wealth that it can contribute and create this beautiful church. And that is not a hypothetical. We have had people walk through these doors and ask these questions. Why is your church so small? Why is it so old-fashioned? And that's because that person views a very specific way of looking at the relationship between spiritual blessings and material blessings. And sometimes you can't even tell the difference between the two. And in many churches, you have things like fundraising, right? Fundraising not by means of collection or donations, but by selling, by merchandise, by offering something back other than actually we're not even supposed to offer something back. You are supposed to offer something to God, but in terms of offering something back to whoever donates, lucky draws, bingos, whatever. So this has actually creeped into the Christian world as well, and I don't think we can be immune from it because we are believers. What about us? We read in Matthew chapter 19, verse 21 to 22 of the rich young ruler, right? The account that's very well known to many of us. He asked Jesus in Matthew chapter 19, verse 16 onwards. He said, "What can I do to have eternal life?" Jesus said to him, "First of all, don't call me good, but keep the commandments." And then he said, "Which ones?" Jesus said, "You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness. Honor your father and your mother, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself." And the young man said to him, "All these things I have kept from my youth." And he asked one more question. What do I still lack? So he had some self-awareness, right? He's like, okay, maybe there's more that I can ask. But I wonder whether he regretted asking the question. Well, he did regret. He regretted the answer, for sure. Because Jesus said to him, "I want you to be perfect. Go, sell what you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come follow me." But the young man heard that saying, and he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. He had great possessions. This is someone I think a lot of people would say his heart is in the right place. Right? He wants to obey, he's kept the commandments. But there was an underlying problem. His underlying problem was his love of his possessions. In fact, in this account, this is Matthew, I think in Luke, the verse even says Jesus looked at him and loved him. Jesus must have felt, in a way, a deep sense of, love can also have an element of sorrow and pity. Oh my gosh, this man who wants to serve, he still got that one fatal flaw. And then Jesus gave the answer in that account. This is a similar answer. Now, Jesus isn't here today. We are not going to meet Jesus and ask him, "What do I still like?" And when he says, "Sell all you have." But when I tell you that, what is the feeling that you get? I think many of us, perhaps including myself, we feel relief. I'm so glad I'm not in the first century when Jesus was alive to have the possibility of asking me to give up all my stuff and follow him. We feel relief. And if you feel relief, then you might think to yourself, hold on a minute, why am I feeling relief? What I should be doing, perhaps, if I could suggest, you don't have to necessarily take this. This is also my my thought, is that we should feel like, okay, I'm not asked to give up everything, but am I ready to? What, in this modern context of my congregation today, my church today, can I do to give? Can I do to help? Can I do to serve? I don't have to give up everything, but that doesn't mean I should give up nothing. Rather than relieve that, okay, my bank account is safe. You want to examine, oh, maybe I can give more. Maybe I can serve more. Maybe I can give more time, which is money nowadays. Maybe I can help others by giving wisdom or know-how or advice. Because I'm in a certain point in my career. Those are things that we look at this account and go like, I need to give up too. I need to sacrifice too. Rather than think, oh, I'm glad I'm not that young ruler in that time. In Luke 12 verse 15, Jesus said, take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things. We see this verse and we're like, of course life is not all about materialism. But when you have this value of life isn't just about materialism, you are actually the opposite of pretty much everything else outside the world. Right? If you look at the outside world, everything is about materialism. Everything is about productivity to seek profit. Everything is about upgrading, seeking more comfort, seeking more material wealth, seeking what's new. That's what their life is for, right? To enjoy and to have more abundance. And nobody questions that. Nobody says, why this person seek abundance? It's not good. In the world, it is accepted as an inherent good. It's inherently good. They don't question that. And sometimes we don't question that because we live in the world and it's the values of the world speaking to us. But when we say, okay, we are committed to Jesus and we're committed to saying to his values, right? When he says this, one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses. We are in a way making war with the values of the world. We are saying we reject that. At least when we profess it, right? How we act is a different thing. Okay, I really do need to move on. The rich are often called out in the Bible. James chapter 5, verse 1 to 6. I won't read that, but you can read it. How the rich are told, you will weep and you will wail. And the very famous account of Jesus saying how hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. The example of Lazarus and the rich man in Luke chapter 16. These are all condemnations of the rich, not praises of the rich. And the warning is that it doesn't last. Material wealth simply cannot be expected to last. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 19 to 21, Jesus preached that, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Where's our heart today? Are we chasing spiritual wealth, or are we chasing physical wealth? Because chasing the physical is chasing what is temporal, what is worldly. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, perhaps I could have someone read that for me. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6 to 10. Thank you, Rick. So the invocation and the warning is that godliness with contentment is great gain. And the opposite of that, greed and love of money, is the root of all kinds of evil. It leads to us straying, some of us straying from the faith into greediness, and it leads to sorrow. It does not fulfill. We know in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 10 to 7, the writer Solomon was someone who found, in fact, fact, meaninglessness or vanity in his wealth. This was a man who had reached the height of wealth, not just in his neighborhood, but in probably the whole known world at that time. He said in verse 10 of Ecclesiastes chapter 5, "He who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver. He who loves abundance with increase, this also is vanity. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. So what profit have the owners except to see them with their eyes? The sleep of a living man is sweet, whether he eats little or much. But the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. There is a severe evil, which I have seen under the sun, riches kept for their owner through his hurt. For those riches perish through misfortune. When he begets a son, there is nothing in his hand. As he came from his mother's womb, naked shall he return, to go as he came, and he shall take nothing from his labor, which he may carry away in his hand. This is also a severe evil, exactly as he came, so shall he go. And what profit has he who has labored for the wind? All his days he also eats in darkness, and he has much sorrow and sickness and anger." So we read almost like a parallel passage from 2,000 years, well, 4,000 years before, um, the, 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 the earlier passage, of how wealth is unpredictable. You can lose it. It is vain. It is meaningless. Um, it actually brings a lot more trouble than it's worth. And it seems satisfying, but eventually it's not. It doesn't fulfill you deeper, because what we really need to fulfill us is actually spiritual contentment and spiritual needs rather than material. And it even leads to destruction. The warning in Matthew chapter 13, verse 22 is that there is a deceitfulness of wealth. In Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 10 to 17, we read that the desire to be rich leads to danger, because in that example, the warning is that you eat and be rich and believe that it is your own merit that has given it rather than God, and you forget God. We see so much warnings in the parable of the rich fool, how he built more and more, and eventually was called to the afterlife on that day. The example of Achan in Joshua chapter 7, someone who hid away his or rather he disobeyed God's command on destroying the spoils of war. And Ananias and Sapphira, the first recorded sin of the church was actually materialism. Right? They hid from the apostles the fact that they had kept a portion of their earnings to themselves and deceived the apostles. So you have all these strong warnings and strong red flags with regards to the seeking of wealth. So what do we do instead? What are we called to do instead? We are called to have contentment. Earlier we read in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6, godliness with contentment is great gain. You tell it to anyone else, they'll be like, no, how can godliness and contentment be great gain? Great gain is great gain. But that's the Christian calling, that we are asked to be content. Anything past the food and shelter portion is bonus. We should be rejoicing that we have anything more than that. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 18, in everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus. But wants us to be thankful. So we have to reflect on our lives that we have so much. Even as a society, even as a country, we have so much. And we have to cultivate a stewardship view. And what I mean by stewardship view is that our wealth is not our own. But our wealth is a means to an end rather than an end to itself. A lot of people see wealth as an inherent end to itself, which is good. But really, it's a means to an end. A means by which God has entrusted us to use for the good of our families, for ourselves as well, for our families, for our church, for our society, but not just for ourselves. That it's from God and it's for service, and ultimately back for God as well. And of course, as we read in Matthew chapter 16, verse 19 to 21, the treasure that we seek has to be spiritual treasure, not physical. fish would never study water because he wouldn't even know that water is all around. There's no need, there's no push to think, wait, is the life I'm living really reflective of materialism or not, or the Christian values around physical blessing? Why are we striving for the things we strive for? Are we working hard because there may be many reasons, right? But one of the reasons could be materialism. Or is it so that we can earn more, so that we can give more and serve more? I read somewhere that if a stranger, it was a point of reflection, that if a stranger watched a secret recording of you for a week, what would he infer about your values and priorities? What would he say that, oh, this is important to this guy, this is important to this woman, family, material success, I don't know, pleasure, whatever. If a stranger audited your monthly spending and saving, what would he say? Okay, he spends on this, therefore, this is important to him. And in the list of priorities, the most important is A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And that's something that we can think about ourselves when we examine whether we too have been influenced by materialism. What is the context and the community in which we live in? Who do we admire? And why do we admire them? What media do we consume? When we go on social media and we read the news, we are actually viewing a lot of advertising. In fact, a lot of targeted advertising now. Now your social media is specifically linked to an audience of one view. Right? Do we see that, oh, this is a lot of likes? You won't even notice it because it's so insidious that this is a lot of people pushing me to spend money in one way or another. How do we deal with that? How do we counter that? And who do we spend time with? There's this saying that you are the average of the 10 people you spend the most time with, or something like that. And the implicit takeaway is that you spend time with successful people, right? You spend time with people who are rich, who are go-getters, who are at the top of their game, who are rolling their way to the bank, rolling in cash, because then you'll be the average of them. And nobody questions that. Wait a minute, is that a good idea necessarily? Is that what God wants for me? What about the people we spend time with, right? What are their values like? Are they the type that shows off to us and therefore pushes us to also want to play the same game? Are they the people who constantly talk about the next investment, the next, the next way to make a buck? And again, there's nothing wrong to talk about those things. Business, just a business thing, but there's this part of business where you need to talk about money, you need to talk about making money and spending money. Again, I'm not saying these things are not important, or that you should go into business. You should not go into business, or that you should go into business without thinking about these things or without talking about things. That's not what I'm saying. But if that's the only thing that we think about, and the only thing that we talk about, and that's our social contact every day, and that's what we pay attention to all the time, we never examine our colleagues' values beyond that, then we have a problem. So, one of the things that I have to grapple with as a partner of the firm, and therefore part of the business, is that you have a lot of numbers floating in your head. You have your target, your cash flow, you have your profit margin, you have your overheads. There are so many moving parts. And then you have your department numbers and your team numbers, and your team numbers, your department numbers, and the firm numbers, and the corporate work numbers and the litigation work numbers. And then it becomes so overwhelming because you're constantly surrounded by thinking about money, right? Even though you didn't want to. But because you went into the business, it becomes part of you. And I'm thinking to myself, hold on a minute, I don't have to constantly think about these things. Right? The whole weight of the firm does not rest on the shoulders of me, any individual partner, or if all my departments. It rests rests on all of us collectively. And we have to be responsible. We have to understand that we're giving people opportunities to work. They need work to sustain themselves. But I cannot spend my whole life anxious about these things and worried about these things and frantic about these things and concerned about these things, because that's not the quality of someone who is minded on spiritual things. And so sometimes I tell even my partners, some of them who are Christian and who profess Christ, that let's not worry too much. God will provide. Because if you worry so much, then in a way you've sort of lost the plot. And you may worry even for good reasons, right? Like I said, you might worry because you want to help people to have a career, and that requires positive thought and thinking and planning on your part. It's not something that you can just carelessly yeah. If they don't have a job, or they don't have a career, that's not my problem. Right? You do have to put effort into it, but it cannot be to a point where it stresses you out and you lose your bearings and you become anxious for all these things. So I just want to end with this verse, one of many, but it's a very beautiful verse. He who trusts in riches will fail, but the righteous will flourish like the green. And again, we find many verses like this in the Bible, and it reminds us of how we shouldn't put our trust in that which is material, rather that we should put our trust in that which is eternal and impossible to defeat. A little bit beyond time, I think we should end with prayer, but if there's a very, very important sharing that you are just dying to give, I'll give you like 30 seconds. No? Okay. Can we end with a closing prayer?